The cursor blinks against the white screen, and I'm staring at a photograph I never expected to see. Camille's arm draped around a man I don't recognize, both of them laughing in what looks like a desert sunset. The email subject line reads, "New beginnings, Miles." I set my coffee down carefully, the way you do when you're trying not to break something that matters. The message is 3 paragraphs long, written in that careful tone Camille uses when she's already made up her mind about something. She's in Sedona, she says, finding herself on a yoga retreat that's become something more permanent. She's met someone who understands her journey. And then, buried in the second paragraph like a landmine wrapped in gratitude, she mentions that she's transferred my Uncle Ray's inheritance into her business account. $340,000 that arrived 6 months ago when Ray passed. For our future, she writes, though apparently our future doesn't include me. I close the laptop and walk outside to the stone bench I built last spring. It sits in our backyard overlooking the Blue Ridge Mountains, positioned exactly where Uncle Ray used to sit when he'd visit. He'd lean back against the armrest I carved from local granite and tell me stories about building his construction business from nothing, about the importance of keeping your money where you can see it, about trusting people slowly and completely. "Miles," he'd say, tapping his temple with one weathered finger. "Smart money never sleeps in someone else's bed." The irony isn't lost on me now. I met Camille 8 years ago at a garden design expo in Charlotte. She was running a booth for sustainable landscaping, passionate about native plants and water conservation. I was immediately drawn to her energy, the way she talked about creating spaces that honored the natural world rather than conquering it. Our first date lasted 6 hours, walking through the botanical gardens, discussing everything from soil composition to the philosophy of placemaking. She moved to Asheville 6 months later, officially to expand her consulting business, but really because we both knew something was taking root between us. We married 2 years after that, a small ceremony in the mountains with just close friends and family. Uncle Ray flew in from Oregon, the only family I had left after my parents passed in my 30s. He pulled me aside during the reception, handed me a small wooden box. "This was your grandmother's," he said, opening it to reveal a simple gold band. "She always said it would know the right finger when the time came." I never gave Camille that ring. Something held me back, some instinct I couldn't name then, but understand perfectly now. The marriage started strong. We bought this house together, combined our practices, created a life that looked good from the outside. Camille's business grew steadily, and my landscape architecture work expanded from residential gardens to major commercial projects. We talked about children, about growing old together in the mountains, about the legacy we'd build. But somewhere around year 4, something shifted. Camille became restless, dissatisfied with our quiet life. She started taking trips alone, wellness retreats, business conferences that seemed to multiply and extend. She'd come back energized but distant, full of new ideas about transformation and authentic living that somehow never included transforming our actual life together. The money conversation started then. She wanted to invest in a retreat center to expand her business in ways that required substantial capital. When I mentioned being conservative with our finances, she'd get that look, patient but patronizing, like I was being small-minded. She started handling more of our joint finances, saying she had a better head for investments. I should have seen the pattern earlier. The gradual shift from our money to my vision. The way she'd make unilateral decisions and present them as discussions. The subtle but persistent message that my cautious approach was holding her back from her true potential. When Uncle Ray died of a heart attack last October, I was genuinely grief-stricken. He'd been more than family. He'd been my mentor, the one person who understood both my love for creating beautiful spaces and my need for financial security. His funeral was small, just me and a handful of his old construction crew. But the stories they told painted a picture of a man who'd lived with integrity and purpose. 3 weeks later, his attorney called. Ray had left me everything: his house in Portland, some rental properties, and $340,000 in various accounts. It was more money than I'd ever imagined having, enough to change our lives completely. I told Camille about the inheritance over dinner at our favorite restaurant. Her eyes lit up immediately, not with happiness for me, but with calculation. Before I'd even finished explaining the details, she was talking about opportunities, about investments, about finally having the capital to think bigger. That night, lying in bed listening to her plan our future with my uncle's money, I heard Ray's voice as clearly as if he was sitting on that stone bench outside. Smart money never sleeps in someone else's bed. The next morning, I called Rita Hendricks, the attorney who'd handled my mother's estate years earlier. Rita is 73, sharp as winter air, and has been protecting families' assets in Western North Carolina for 4 decades. I need to set up an irrevocable trust, I told her. Expecting trouble, Miles? Hoping to prevent it. Within 2 weeks, every dollar of Uncle Ray's inheritance was protected in a trust that listed me as the sole beneficiary and Rita as the trustee. The trust was irrevocable, meaning that once established, neither I nor anyone else could simply dissolve it or redirect the funds. If someone wanted access to that money, they'd have to prove legitimate need and get Rita's approval, something that wasn't going to happen for a yoga retreat love affair. I never lied to Camille about the trust, but I didn't volunteer the information either. When she asked about the inheritance, I showed her the account statements that showed the money had been transferred for estate planning purposes. Technically true, if incomplete. Meanwhile, I started paying attention to things I'd been ignoring. Camille's phone calls that ended when I entered the room. Credit card statements showing charges in cities where she claimed to be attending business meetings, but couldn't remember details when I asked. The way she'd become suddenly interested in learning about our joint accounts, our investment portfolios, my retirement planning. 3 months ago, she announced another retreat, this one in Sedona. A month-long intensive program for entrepreneurial visionaries, she called it. She seemed unusually excited, more animated than I'd seen her in years. This could change everything for us, Miles, she said, already packing clothes that looked more like vacation wear than yoga gear. I helped her load the car, kissed her goodbye, and went inside to call Frank Morrison, our neighbor across the street. Frank is retired FBI, the kind of man who notices things professionally and personally. We'd become friends over the years, bonding over our shared appreciation for well-made tools and strong coffee. Frank, I said, I need a favor. If anyone comes by the house while Camille's gone, anyone at all, would you mind letting me know? Frank was quiet for a moment. You expecting someone, Miles? I'm not sure what I'm expecting. I'll keep an eye out. A week later, Frank called. A silver BMW had been parked in our driveway for 3 hours. A man had gone inside, looked comfortable enough to suggest he'd been there before. Frank, being Frank, had gotten the license plate and run it through a contact. The car was registered to David Chen, a real estate developer from Charlotte, who specialized in wellness retreat properties. I thanked Frank and hung up, then sat in my office for a long time, looking at a photo of Camille and me taken on our honeymoon. We're standing in front of a massive redwood tree, both of us laughing at something I can't remember now. She looks genuinely happy in that picture, unguarded in a way she hadn't been for years. That's when I started documenting everything systematically, not out of anger, but out of necessity. I set up a discrete recording system on our home phone. I began keeping detailed records of all our joint accounts, noting any unusual activity. I started a journal, writing down dates, times, and details of conversations that seemed significant. It wasn't paranoia. It was preparation. The morning I received Camille's email, I'd already been awake for 2 hours. working in the garden Uncle Ray had helped me design during his last visit. It's a meditation space built around native plants, designed to change subtly with the seasons, while maintaining its essential character year-round. Ray had suggested adding a water feature, a small fountain that would provide gentle sound while attracting birds. "Gardens are like people, Miles," he'd said, kneeling to adjust a stone in the pathway. "They need good bones to weather the storms." Reading Camille's message felt like watching a storm I'd been tracking finally make landfall. Devastating, but not surprising. I forwarded the email to Rita immediately, then called her office. "Rita, it's Miles. I think we need to meet." "I saw the email. How are you holding up?" "Better than expected, actually. Can you meet me at the coffee shop on Hayward Street in an hour?" Rita was already at a corner table when I arrived, a legal pad covered in notes and 2 cups of coffee waiting. She looked like what she was, a woman who'd spent decades helping people navigate their worst days with their dignity intact. "First things first," she said without preamble. "The trust is secure. She can't touch that money, period. But I imagine she doesn't know that yet." "She doesn't. The question is how to handle this, legally and personally." Rita studied me over her coffee cup. "What do you want, Miles?" "Really want, not what you think you should want." I'd been asking myself the same question since receiving the email. Part of me wanted to call Camille immediately, to demand explanations and apologies. Part of me wanted to simply change the locks and file for divorce. But sitting there with Rita, I realized what I actually wanted was something more complex. "I want to protect what matters," I said finally. "And I want to understand who I've been married to for 8 years. "Fair enough. Here's what I recommend. Don't contact her yet. Let her make the next move. In the meantime, we document everything, protect all your assets, and prepare for several possible scenarios." Over the next week, I followed Rita's advice. I worked in my garden, took on new projects, maintained my normal routine. It was surprisingly peaceful, this period of waiting. Without the constant undercurrent of tension that had characterized my marriage for the past 2 years, I felt like I could think clearly for the first time in months. Frank stopped by on Thursday evening, carrying a bottle of bourbon and wearing the expression of a man with something important to say. "Miles, I hope you don't mind, but I've been keeping that eye out like you asked." We sat on the stone bench, watching the sun set over the mountains, while Frank told me what he'd observed. David Chen had been to the house 4 times in the past 3 months, always when Camille was supposedly out of town. He'd clearly had keys, had acted like he belonged there. The last time, just a week before Camille left for Sedona, they'd loaded several boxes into his car. "I didn't want to assume anything," Frank said, "but given what you asked me to watch for..." "You did right, Frank. I appreciate it more than I can say." That night, I went through the house methodically, cataloging what was missing. It wasn't much. Some jewelry that had been my mother's, a few pieces of art we'd bought together, financial documents from her business. Things that could be easily transported and weren't necessarily theft, since we were married and had shared property. But it was evidence of planning, of a decision made well before the Sedona revelation. I called Thomas Brennan, the trust officer Rita had recommended, and scheduled a meeting for the following week. Thomas specialized in complex asset protection, particularly for business owners and professionals navigating difficult divorces. "The good news," Thomas said when we met, "is that you've protected the inheritance perfectly. The trust structure makes it completely separate from marital property. The challenging news is that everything else you've accumulated during the marriage is potentially subject to division." We spent 2 hours going through my financial situation. The house, my business, our joint investments, retirement accounts. It was substantial but not overwhelming, the kind of portfolio that represented careful planning rather than extraordinary wealth. "Here's what I'd recommend," Thomas said. "We prepare 3 scenarios. Scenario 1. She realizes she's made a mistake and wants to reconcile. Scenario 2. She wants a divorce but is willing to be reasonable about property division. Scenario 3. She tries to fight for everything, including claiming rights to the inheritance. What's most likely depends on how desperate she is and how much she thinks she can get away with. But based on what you've told me, I'd prepare for Scenario 3 while hoping for Scenario 2. The call came on Sunday morning. I was having coffee on the stone bench, reading a book about Japanese garden design, when my phone rang. Miles, it's me. Camille's voice sounded different, breathless, excited, but with an undertone of something harder to identify. Guilt, maybe, or defiance. Hello, Camille. Did you get my email? I did. There was a pause. I could hear desert wind in the background, the sound of a door closing. I know this is sudden, but I hope you can understand. David and we've found something special. Something I've been looking for without knowing it. I see. Miles, I need you to not make this harder than it has to be. I've already moved the inheritance money because we're going to need it for the new venture. David has investors lined up for a retreat center here, and I'm going to be the wellness director. It's everything I've dreamed of. I set my coffee cup down carefully, the same way I had when reading her email. Camille, we need to talk about the money. What about it? It's in the business account, ready to be invested. This is our chance to build something meaningful. The money isn't accessible the way you think it is. Silence on the other end. Then, what do you mean? I mean, I protected Uncle Ray's inheritance in an irrevocable trust. The money you think you transferred was just a placeholder account. The actual inheritance is protected. The silence stretched longer this time. When she spoke again, her voice had changed completely. You bastard! You've been planning this. I've been protecting what matters. Yes. I'll fight you, Miles. I'll get a lawyer. That money is marital property. Actually, it's not. Inherited assets that are kept separate from marital property remain separate, which is exactly what I did. I could hear her breathing sharp and fast. Fine. Keep your precious money, but I want half of everything else. The house, your business, all of it. That's your choice, Camille. But before you make any permanent decisions, you should know that I've been documenting things, including David's visits to our house while you were supposedly traveling for business. Another long silence. How long have you known? Long enough. Miles, this isn't how I wanted this to happen. For the first time in the conversation, she sounded like the woman I'd married. How did you want it to happen? I don't know. I felt like I was disappearing in our life. Like I was becoming smaller every year instead of growing. David makes me feel alive again. I closed my eyes, listening to the wind in the trees Uncle Ray had helped me plant. I understand feeling stuck, Camille. I don't understand the lying and the theft. It wasn't theft. I thought if I could make the investment work, prove that I could build something significant, you'd see that I was worth betting on. I did bet on you. I bet 8 years of my life on you. She was crying now, quietly but audibly. I know. I'm sorry, Miles. I really am. I just don't know how to come back from this. I don't either. We agreed to talk again in a few days, after we'd both had time to think. I hung up feeling something I hadn't expected. Sadness, more than anger. Disappointment, more than betrayal. That evening, Rita called to check in. How did it go? Better and worse than expected. She's going to want to negotiate. That's probably the best outcome. Litigation is expensive and unpredictable. If she's willing to be reasonable, we can probably work something out that protects your interests while giving her enough to start over. Over the next month, We negotiated through lawyers. Camille would keep her business and her personal accounts. I would keep the house and my practice. We'd split our joint investments and retirement accounts according to North Carolina law. The inheritance, as I'd known it would be, remained completely protected. The final detail was the most important to me. In exchange for a slightly more generous property settlement, Camille agreed to sign a comprehensive waiver regarding any future claims on Uncle Ray's inheritance or any assets derived from it. "Why is that so important to you?" Rita asked when I insisted on the language. "Because I have plans for that money. Plans that honor what Ray intended." The divorce was finalized on a Tuesday in November, almost exactly a year after Uncle Ray's death. I signed the papers in Rita's office, then drove home to the empty house that was now fully mine. That evening, I called Thomas Brennan. "Thomas, I want to talk about the trust, specifically about establishing something permanent with part of the inheritance." "What did you have in mind?" "A foundation. Something focused on creating public spaces, particularly memorial gardens and community healing spaces. I want to call it the Raymond Trenton Foundation." We spent the next several months establishing the foundation's structure and mission. The goal was simple: to create beautiful, meaningful spaces that would serve communities for generations. Memorial gardens for families who couldn't afford private landscaping. Healing gardens at hospitals and care facilities. Community spaces that would bring people together and honor the memory of those who'd been lost. The first project was a memorial garden at the local Veterans Center, designed around the same principles Uncle Ray had taught me. Good bones, native materials, spaces that would honor the past while serving the present. I kept half of the inheritance for my own security, enough to ensure that I'd never have to worry about basic needs, enough to take on meaningful projects without worrying about profit margins. The other half went to seed the foundation, to ensure it could operate sustainably and grow over time. 6 months after the divorce was final, I got a postcard from Sedona. A picture of red rocks against blue sky, with a brief message on the back. "The retreat center didn't work out. David wasn't who I thought he was. I hope you're well. See double quote." I showed it to Frank over coffee the next morning. "You going to respond?" "I don't think so. Some chapters end when they end." Frank nodded, sipping his coffee. "You seem good, Miles. Better than good, actually." He was right. The months since the divorce had been among the most productive and satisfying of my life. My business was thriving, focused now on projects that aligned with my values, rather than just my bank account. The foundation was gaining recognition, attracting both clients and donors who shared its mission. I'd started dating someone, Sarah, a librarian who shared my love of gardening and my appreciation for quiet evenings. Most importantly, I'd learned something valuable about the difference between protecting yourself and imprisoning yourself. Uncle Ray's money had given me the freedom to make choices based on what was right, rather than what was safe. The trust hadn't just protected my inheritance, it had protected my ability to live with integrity. Last week I was working in the memorial garden at the Veterans Center when an elderly man approached me. He walked slowly, using a cane, but his eyes were sharp and alert. "You the one who designed this?" he asked, gesturing toward the space I'd created. "I am." "It's beautiful, peaceful. My son's name is on that wall there." He pointed toward the memorial wall, where we'd inscribed the names of local veterans who died in service. "This is the first place I've been able to come and feel like he's still with me somehow." We stood together quietly for a few minutes, watching the fountain Uncle Ray had suggested ripple in the afternoon light. "Thank you," the man said finally. "This matters." That night, sitting on the stone bench in my backyard, I thought about the journey from reading Camille's email to this moment. The betrayal had been real, the pain genuine, the financial threat significant. But the response, the careful protection of assets, the strategic thinking, the focus on building rather than merely defending, had led to something better than I could have imagined. The most important financial lesson I learned through all of this is something Uncle Ray had tried to teach me years earlier. Inherited money should never be commingled with marital assets. Not because you don't trust your spouse, but because life is unpredictable and people change in ways we can't always anticipate. An irrevocable trust, properly structured, ensures that money intended for your benefit serves that purpose regardless of what happens in your personal relationships. But beyond the technical financial advice, there's something deeper. True security doesn't come from protecting what you have. It comes from knowing what you stand for and having the resources to live according to those values. The trust didn't just save my inheritance. It gave me the freedom to be generous, to take risks on meaningful work, to build something that would outlast me. If you've made it this far in my story, I'd love to hear yours. What financial lessons have you learned the hard way? How have you protected what matters most to you? Drop a comment below and let me know. And if this story resonated with you, I'd appreciate it if you'd subscribe to see more real stories about money, relationships, and second chances.